You're listening to Nostalgia Club, the podcast where we look back on our favorite childhood stories and revisit them as adults. At least one of us hasn't read or watched these series, so we also get a first-timer's opinion. Spoiler alert, we will be discussing storylines and future events beyond the first books and episodes, so proceed with caution.
Hello and welcome back to our show. I'm Victoria, and as usual, I'm joined by...
Michael.
And Jino.
Wow!
Hey.
Today we are talking about a beloved fantasy book series called Redwall.
Woo!
Specifically the first book.
Yes.
Because oh boy, are there lots of books.
Yes. We're talking about the most iconic book being the first and the name of the series.
Yes, Redwall, just to give a general overview, I'm taking this directly from Wikipedia. It's a series chronicling the adventures of anthropomorphic animals inhabiting Redwall Abbey and the surrounding countryside of Mossflower Wood, including mice, moles, hares, badgers, and other woodland species. Frequently, the peace-loving creatures of Mossflower are called upon to become warriors to defend themselves from marauding bands of vermin, such as rats, weasels, and foxes. Redwall is the first of these books, and it takes place somewhere within the middle of the overall timeline of Redwall chronology.
Which I think is rad. I love a story that starts in middle, like a Star War.
Ooh, yes. You get a little bit of history, and then it leaves room open for an interesting future.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is fantasy. The book cover is a little mouse wearing a little green sort of habit, like a monk, with a sword and a shield. And there's a bright, golden dawn shining behind him. So it's like anthropomorphized animals in a kind of medieval fantasy setting.
Gina and I were talking the other day about how the cover on the version that I bought is definitely a more modern and updated one, where the main character, Matthias, looks very much like a warrior. But the one that both Gino and I remember more clearly is the Abbey. But then there's like a small kind of like portrait in the center, and that's where the protagonist is. But he's like this tiny like mouse just drowning in his clothes and holding like a little sword in his tiny little hand. And he's like, yeah, Redwall!
Like, literally imagine the smallest mouse you've ever seen and then make that a child and then give him like a toothpick. And that was the OG Redwall that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And that's how I envision Matthias, as this little like ball of fuzz with like a tail and feet.
Well, let's see. Here on Nostalgia Club, we normally like to have at least one person who isn't familiar with the source material. And on today's episode, that's me!
Wow!
Hooray!
I never read Redwall. And I never watched one of I think there's 3 animated series that were based off of Redwall and its subsequent sequels, which is surprising because you'd think something like this would be right up my alley, and so did I, but I just never got around to it.
There's warriors. There's a cat. What more could you want?
Yeah, it was, in a way, this was kind of on my bucket list, because whenever I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember a lot of kids at some grade level, this was like the book that the kids who read like fantasy, this was the book they were reading. And I was just reading something else at the time. Watership
Down is like, what if Animal had society? Redwall is, what if Animal had civilization?
Ooh, yeah.
Wow. You know what? Yeah. Okay.
Well, how did you feel about it? What were your vibes, Michael, when you read Redwall for the first time?
Wedwall?
I know this is going to become a tongue twister real quick.
It was great. Brian Jacques, just reading like bits of the Wikipedia, just trying to get a handle on the author, Brian Jacques. The way he describes things is very evocative, and in the way that, talking about, like, for example, the Frindle episode, a lot of these novels written for younger demographics will be very clear with the material that's important, things about character and motivation, what the character's thinking, why they're doing what they're doing. And Redwall and Frindle are 2 very different books in terms of how they handle their story progression in prose. Redwall is like 400 pages. Is it like 400? It felt like 400.
We're checking.
This one is 351 pages.
Well, not too far off. Redwall is very long, 351 pages compared to Frindle, which is like 100. The text on Redwall is much smaller than the text on the Frindle book.
And it's denser, too.
Much denser.
Lots more characters.
Yes.
Lots more storylines.
Descriptions of locations and food.
Oh, the food.
The food.
There's so much that's explored, and the splendor of the environment around all the characters and the depths of the thoughts and what they're feeling. And yet, something I noticed and appreciated from the jump is that all of the very important details, even in Redwall, much like in Frindle, are described very clearly. You know what the main character, this little mouse, Matthias or Matthias, or however we'll want to say it, you know what he's wearing. And you know that it's a little bit too big for him, that his sandals are a little too floppy, and his monk's habit is a little too loose and long. And you know that the villainous rat, Clooney, you know exactly what he looks like. And you know that he's covered in sinister-looking armor, and that it has stag beetle horns on the helmet, and that he's got a poison barb on his extra-long tail and an eye patch with a scar. And you know that he is described as the biggest, meanest rat you've ever seen. And whenever Matthias has a thought, you know why he's thinking that, and his anxieties and his desires and passions to become a warrior like Martin the warrior, the semi-mythological warrior of old. And you know that Clooney, when he has a thought, you know it's based on the rampant desire to conquer and take all he can. And that makes these books very enjoyable and, in a way, kind of unlocked, I think, something in my mind of like, you can write something like Redwall that has all these characters and like all of this depth of analyzing the mechanics of medieval settings.
Siege warfare.
Yeah. And yet you can expect a young reader to understand it if you're just clear about the important stuff that matters when it comes to characters and intentions.
Treat your audience with respect. They'll get it, as long as you convey it well.
Yeah.
And if you convey it well, you can convey as much as you want.
Yeah. That was my vibe. Very, very enjoyable, even as the book got very, very long and the various subplots and things got more and more expansive. I was able to keep that through line because of how clear all of the intentions are made. And that's something that this book does a lot, which is jumping around perspectives between various characters in what is, as Jino said, just like siege warfare. It's a war between this oncoming horde of vermin and rats against the peaceful critters of Redwall Abbey and Mossflower Wood. For the both of you, both back in the day when you read it for the first time, what you remember of your vibes then and your vibes now, how'd you feel?
I loved Redwall as a kid. I read not only the first book, but I definitely read subsequent books as well. I'm pretty sure I read like Martin the Warrior, which is like the prequel to Redwall. There are many prequels, I guess. And Matameo, which is the sequel to Redwall. I was very invested in this world. As you can probably tell from previous episodes, I loved any world that was like fantasy and had anthropomorphic creatures or just like animals who live in a society. Thought it was very fun.
They're just like us.
Yeah. But surprisingly, I know I was obviously really into this series as a kid and I remember reading the various books, but I didn't remember a lot of the plot. So it was nice to come back to it and almost experience the story for the first time again, because even though I know the main character and kind of generally what happens to him in the story, I had forgotten all these side plots. In fact, it only really came back to me when I read certain characters' names. Like when Warbeak shows up, I was like, oh, that sounds really familiar. And then once I found out how that story progresses, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But yeah, just really wonderful. It made me really hungry reading it. Every time food is described in this book, it's so wonderful. Like it literally plays for all of your senses, even though it's written on a page and it's not quote unquote real. You can literally like taste and smell the food.
Hemingway for kids.
Yeah. Even like when they're in the middle of active warfare, he'll take time to describe like, oh, and then Cornflower brought up stew and some fresh baked bread up to the defenders and they ate it with a bit of honey. And I was just like,
elderberry wine, fresh from the cellars.
Yeah. And I was like, all of this sounds amazing and I need it immediately.
And now they have a cookbook.
Yeah, there's a cookbook.
We're going to cook this book.
Yeah. Every recipe in the cookbook. No, that would take forever. So that was my general impression. What about you, Jino?
I love Mouse with Sword. Mouse with Sword is one of the best genres. I know it. You know it. I think the world knows it. Mouse with Sword keeps coming back in like our culture.
Yeah.
Like people keep making Mouse with Sword and it's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Mouse with Sword works.
It does.
I know I opposed Aslan and Narnia walking like a person. But mouse with sword. Yes, please. I read Redwall as a kid, but more so I watched the PBS animated show. They did a season of Redwall, they did a season of Madameo, they did a season of Martin the Warrior, and dadgummit, this show rules. The theme song is awesome. I mean, obviously, the book is very long and complex, especially for a kid's story, but the show is very faithful. It's a very faithful adaptation. They do truncate some of the more violent or some of the more like complicated scenes, but overall, watching the show, you'll get a pretty good idea of what the book is. And the animation for being like a PBS show, I think it was a Canadian studio that animated it on what I assume must have been a very low budget. They kept it pretty clean.
It holds up.
It holds up. Oh, what a wonderful world. There's just enough strange funkiness in it to warrant discussion, but it feels so lived in and it feels so alive. The history that's built. Don't think about why they're monks. Who knows what they're worshiping? Something. They say grace for someone. Don't worry about it. I just love Mouse with Sword.
It's good.
And I loved it as a kid and I love it now.
I just want to second that point about the TV show because I know I said I never watched it, but while I was in the middle of reading it, I did remember the animated show and I looked up on YouTube the intro and like the first episode because I was like, I remember seeing some of this when I was young, and now that I'm older and the show is old enough, it's just on the internet. You can watch it.
Especially because it's PBS.
Yeah.
It's just out there now.
And I think it was just like the first half of the first episode. Gino's absolutely right. That song, that opening theme is a freaking banger.
So good.
It's, oh my gosh.
Get that old medieval flute going and
the Gregorian chant.
Yeah.
And then like some weird reed flute in the middle. It's like, and you're like, whoa. It does the thing that like the intro theme song will do whenever it's a show that involves like the forces of evil, where it's like the first part is, here's our good guys and here's the theme for our good guys. And then it's the bad guys and here's the theme for our bad guys. And then it's the good guys again and it's the motif recurring. So it's...
Sorry, I have a question.
No,
yeah.
Is there a different theme song for like Martin the Warrior?
No.
Okay. But
Same
do they
one.
change the do they show different scenes?
Yeah, so the opening for Redwall is just scenes from Redwall.
Yeah,
The
that's
opening
what
for
I thought.
Madameo is scenes from Madameo. Opening for Martin the Warrior is just scenes from Martin the Warrior. They didn't make any new animation for the opening because, again, the budgets must have been tight. They just cut the most interesting parts from the episode you're about to watch.
Yeah.
And they're like, here it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I watched the first episode just this morning because I was curious how they had adapted it, and it was very fun.
Yeah. The show adds a little bit of information that I think we don't learn in the book about the main character's backstory. But besides that, great show.
Yeah.
Great retelling. And apparently, they're making a movie at Netflix. But they're making a movie at Netflix for anything these days, so who knows if that'll happen.
Well, this is a happy circumstance then, because now, I mean, the both of you could already do this, but now I also can watch it and have knowledge of the book as well.
Yeah.
Hooray!
So speaking of the book, we've done a fair amount of vibes. Let's get into a plot summary of this very long and expansive...
Oh boy. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to gloss over some things because there's a lot.
Okay.
So... the location is Redwall. It is an abbey full of monks. The monks are notorious for being peace-loving and healers. They will feed the hungry and they will help the poor. And so they have free reign to travel across this world, the nearby Mossflower Wood, which stretches, I suppose, very far. And all creatures will respect them. And not Madameo, that's his kid. Matthias is a young...
spoiler alert, no kidding.
Matthias is a very young mouse who is training to become a monk under the tutelage of Abbot Mortimer. Is that his name?
Yes.
And also with his old friend, the very old Methuselah, who's sort of like the gatekeeper and also like the lore keeper. All the mouse monks have M names, which is very funny. Even like Father Alf is like Methalphemus or something.
Yeah. There are other mice who don't have M names.
And then you got like Cornflower, who's like a cool field mouse. I'm not restrained by your hokey religions, kid. They worship something. But they also have a hero, Martin the Warrior, who was a wandering person, a wandering traveler, or maybe a monk who took up the sword to defend the abbey against great evil. And so he has a tapestry and they kind of like, they don't pray to him, but he's kind of like their symbol. He's their mascot.
He's essentially almost like a saint.
Yeah. He's a cool saint because he has a sword.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about saints. Sorry, saints. However, their peace is shattered when Clooney the Scourge, a giant like pirate rat, is his backstory, arrives with his horde. Clooney the Scourge conquers all, and he loves to kill people who don't surrender to him, and he loves to take their stuff and rule their lands. And so there's a little bit of hijinks where Clooney tries to like gain entry into Redwall and like feign peacefulness and like does a whole deception thing. But basically what happens is Clooney besieges Redwall. Besieges this giant castle and immediately comes into the first problem of medieval siege warfare. How do I get over the walls? The walls are very tall.
Yes.
And what happens thereafter is Clooney attempting again and again, trying various plans, most of which are actually pretty well thought out, to try and breach the walls. The defenders have basically gathered all the inhabitants surrounding the Abbey and sheltered them in the Abbey, which creates a very strong defensive force because you have creatures with all sorts of talents. You have like tiny field mice who are archers, you have otters who are slingers, Constance the Badger.
We'll talk about Constance.
We'll talk about Constance. Oh, Constance, hell yeah.
Moles.
Moles?
Yeah, who can dig.
Four mole who talk in this crazy like dialect. Which at first, when you're reading, you're like, I can't understand this. And then only later do you realize that the rest of the creatures also can't understand it and you feel a little better about yourself.
Yeah.
So Clooney tries schemes and plans to try to take the Abbey, and they keep failing because his leadership structure and his leadership style means that all of his cronies hate each other and keep backstabbing each other, which keeps foiling plans. Meanwhile, Clooney keeps having these visions of Martin the Warrior slowly approaching him as if to slaughter him. Clooney starts going crazy, he starts obsessing with Martin, and so he steals the portrait. He steals the tapestry of Martin the Warrior. Matthias, meanwhile, along with Methuselah, decides that the only thing that can save Redwall Abbey is to find Martin's tomb, find his shield, and find his sword. And then Matthias, as they learn, may be a reincarnation of Martin. Matthias must take up arms against Clooney and defend Redwall, become the next warrior. And so Matthias goes on what at first is sort of like a fact-finding puzzle-solving mission where they like explore the Abbey and find secret doors and like put shields on pedestals and deflect light into bell towers and such. And then they find the tomb, they find the shield, they triangulate the position of the sword, they make their way up to the roof and it's not there. And then Matthias realizes, oh, the sparrows. Surprise, there's sparrows living on the roof of the Redwall Abbey.
This is a giant abbey.
It's a giant abbey.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the scale of this world in a bit because that's really interesting. But the sparrows have their own like warrior caste society on the roof. They just kind of like chill up there and they don't like interfere with the monks down below. It's fascinating. They shoot down one of the sparrows and then Matthias goes by himself to return the sparrow and becomes a prisoner. They trade war crimes, so it's fine. It all evens out. And Matthias learns that, oh, the sparrow stole the sword. But then by some foolish mistake, the sword got taken by a giant adder. Asmodeus, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Asmodeus.
He says his name.
Terrifying
Literally,
animation.
as soon as he shows up for the first time in the book, I was struck with immediate chills because I remember how scared of this snake I was as a kid.
Asmodeus is massive. I think even to like real life mouse to adder ratio, Asmodeus is huge. And he has hypnotizing eyes and a hypnotizing voice that can lull prey into a sense of either safety or fear and paralyze them. And then he just eats them. So Matthias, who ends up sneaking out of the castle a lot, he does this a lot, sneaks out and goes on an epic quest to retrieve Martin's sword. He meets a band of gorilla voles who argue amongst themselves, but Matthias is able to win them over. He meets a cat, a vegetarian cat. He meets an owl. They find the snake. They kill the snake. They get the sword. Meanwhile, Clooney has finally found a way to breach the walls. He can't use clever tricks. He can't climb over the top. He can't dig under the bottom. He can't ram down the door. He can't pretend he's like an old sick man and sneak his way in. So instead, he kidnaps a family of dormice, threatens to cook them and eat them alive, sends the patriarch in disguise into the Abbey under threat of death, tells him to open the gates, and then assassinates him or attempts to assassinate him as soon as they're inside. It's brutal.
Yeah.
The Abbey's taken. Clooney's about to like execute the abbot or something. And Matthias, after like force marching himself and like a whole army of like 500 voles for like 3 days, along with 1,000 sparrows, attacks the Abbey, overwhelms the defenders, kills all the rats, crushes Clooney in a bell tower, and saves the Abbey. And unfortunately, there are casualties along the way. We can discuss those more if we wish, but Matthias fulfills his destiny as Martin's reincarnation, becomes the warrior, gets a wife as a reward, which is like kind of weird, but also like, I guess it's fine because they like each other anyway, so like, okay. And also mouse lives.
I guess.
How old are they? Who knows? They don't really go into that.
No, it was like a whole thing where at the very beginning, Matthias at the Great Golden Jubilee Feast is like talking with Cornflower. One of the other like monks is like commenting on like, oh, young Matthias and Cornflower really get along well. And the abbot is like, careful, Matthias is going to be a monk. so he can't date people.
And at the end, he's dying. He's like, Matthias, come closer. You're not a monk anymore, my guy. You got a sword. You're a sick-ass warrior. Go date Cornflower. Matthias is like, yeah.
They've basically been flirting the entire book, so.
Yeah.
When Matthias has been around and not questing or like
brutally injured.
Even when he's not there, like Cornflower's like thinking about him. She's like, I hope he's okay.
And there's a whole cast of wonderful characters. There's hedgehogs and rabbits and badgers, as we mentioned, and so many other woodland creatures and squirrels. And Cornflower torches a bunch of rats alive accidentally at one point.
Yeah, there's a whole thing near the end there where fire is never used by these creatures as a weapon of war.
It's like their one Geneva Convention.
Yeah, it's like nuclear arms or whatever.
Yeah, because if they burn down the forest, no one wins. Everyone dies.
But when Clooney's forces push a siege tower up to the wall that they had like sneaked around the back in the middle of an assault on the front of Redwall, Cornflower just happens to be up there on the wall bringing some soup to, I think, Ambrose the hedgehog, and then like turns around and sees a rat hop off of the siege tower, and she goes, ah! And then hurls a lamp at it.
Well, first, Ambrose throws his soup onto the rat. So
That's right.
Yeah, it's like hot boiling soup fresh out of the pot. And then the rat is like, my eyes. And then out of just like pure adrenaline, Cornflower throws her lamp and it shatters and it coats it in oil.
Just like napalms the siege tower, which Clooney spent like considerable time and manpower to build. And he's like, this'll work. And he's just about to set his planet in motion. And then it just torches it. And Clooney's like, what's going on here?
I do want to say, as a result of spending a lot of time talking about the mechanics of like siege warfare and of like how these various defenders on each side and attackers like mechanically and logistically organize their plans, and as a result of switching around perspectives a lot, and admittedly as a result of the fact that Clooney is the only person with good ideas on his side compared to the Redwall defenders who have good ideas all around, and it contributes to their success. And of course, again, another factor being that Clooney has, honestly, the harder task at hand because he is laying siege to an extremely large fortification with only infantry.
Yeah, only infantry.
No siege weapons.
Limited range support. He has to get past not just a wall, but a trench and a badger. So it's work cut out for him.
And so at a certain point, when you're reading this, all of these plans that Clooney's coming up with, and he's a very clever, sneaky guy. His plans are good plans. Seeing them fail again and again and again, oftentimes with like relatively little effort on behalf of the defenders, it starts to feel like you're reading a Looney Tunes episode.
A Clooney Tunes.
Clooney Tunes.
Oh my gosh. It's perfect.
There's a lot of cat and mouse-esque shenanigans where Clooney like enacts a plan and then the Redwallers develop a counter for it. And so Clooney develops like a secret second plan to use the first plan as the diversion, but then the Redwallers develop a secret second counter plan. And then Clooney develops a secreter third counter plan, which then gets torched by a child.
By pure happenstance.
And the next day the abbots are like, so that was a war crime, but we're just, good job.
Yeah. They're like, so we don't use fire, but it worked out for
It was
us.
an
Hey, you know what? Good soup. Good job, Cornflower. Good soup. Back to the kitchen with you.
Yeah, so there is definitely something very funny, unintentionally, I suppose, about... I suppose that part of it's intentional, because you are meant to, I think, as a reader, especially a young reader, point and laugh at how this truly evil figure of Clooney the Scourge gets routinely foiled again and again. But it is funny how when Clooney enters the story, he is described so imposingly and so viciously, and the lore of Clooney within the world is that his name has been invoked for a very long time as a boogeyman. You know, if you don't eat your vegetables, Clooney will get you. If you don't come inside, Clooney will get you.
I don't believe he's real.
Yeah, and so when he shows up, it's like, we're in serious trouble. Like, we are all peace-loving critters who have never known a day of strife, seemingly, within our lives. We don't defend ourselves, and this nightmare figure from beyond the veil has arrived with an army of 400 vermin, all this armor and, like, weapons, and we're in serious trouble. Clooney's gonna walk up and he's gonna really do some serious damage and maybe overwhelm us. And for the next 300 pages, Clooney proceeds to get dunked on again and again and again. He doesn't get, like, a single win until the very end.
But here's the brilliance of the book, though, because you start scared of Clooney, and as Clooney's threat level goes down, Asmodeus' threat level goes up. Because we stop being scared of Clooney and we start being scared of Asmodeus, who Matthias has gone off on his own to fight. And so there's always tension.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, like immediately, like as Asmodeus dies, and we're like, oh, everything's going to be okay. Suddenly Clooney gets it.
Yeah.
And then his threat level skyrockets. And so it's a brilliant way of plotting out the book where even though it's lighthearted and it's funny, there's always danger. And you're always on the edge of your seat.
Lots of good cliffhangers at the end of chapters.
Oh, yes.
One thing we should just definitely talk about real quick, just so we don't forget, because there's plenty to talk about with Redwall, is Constance the Badger.
Yes.
Best character.
Great in the book and in the show.
Yeah.
Her cool level does not diminish when transitioned to animation. Constance is well, okay, if we can actually take a tangent, because I want to talk about the scale of the world.
Yeah, okay.
Because
I also
Constance is
wanted
a
to talk
badger
about
versus
this.
mice. So Redwall, the first book in the series, was written in an interesting way where it's implied that humanity exists and operates around this civilization of animals. Clooney rides into the series on a human cart, directing a horse that has been hitched up by a human. And he can't really control the cart. So, like, obviously this is not a rat invention. And later he uses it to build a siege tower. And there's implications of other human activity, like the quarry. Like, maybe mice use that to build Redwall, but also, like, maybe that's a human quarry because it was operated on after snakes moved in. So, like, why would mice operate in a quarry
Yeah.
with snakes around? Like, who built the Abbey? You know, there's, like, big like, giant roads and stuff. Later books drop this.
Yeah.
Later books stop referencing humanity, and it's just like they never existed. But the scale of the creatures, Constance is badger-sized, and the mice are mice-sized, which means Constance is huge compared to the mice.
An earlier part of the book, Matthias escorts the church mice and Cornflower's family home, and Constance is the one who's pulling the cart. I'm assuming it's like almost like a human-sized cart or something. It's like not very clear, but it's like she's definitely way bigger than these mice.
And it raises so many questions. Did they build this cart for Constance? Who pulled the cart before Constance?
Well, apparently in later books, the scale of all the creatures becomes more even.
That's true.
Yeah.
Do they have horses in later books?
No.
Okay.
There's literally a spot on Wikipedia called discrepancies. The reason for this is because the author, when he wrote Redwall, he didn't actually expect it to get published or even to become the phenomena that it is. And so I think he just structured the world building a little bit differently. And then when he wanted to expand on it for later books, he decided, okay, maybe I should like rework some of these things because now like it doesn't really make sense for there to be humans operating at the same time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, like there were like references to horses and cows, and they don't do that in later books because it's too complicated
And
to
like
think about.
Clooney's like a shipwreck that's stowed away on a human ship from like South America or something.
Yeah.
Oh, it
Yeah,
says...
there's like actual references to like real life places.
Yeah.
Like he's like a Portuguese rat or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
Which is interesting because Brian Jacques, the author, held a bunch of jobs apparently. I'm just looking at a website that says the various jobs he had included merchant sailor, firefighter,
Whoa.
dock worker, truck driver, boxer, and even stand-up comedian.
Wow. What a guy.
Yeah, which when he writes, some thought Clooney was a Portuguese rat. It sounds random, but part of me wonders, as a merchant sailor and like a dock worker, did he have like run-ins with specifically Portuguese rats that were really
Giant.
nasty?
Yeah.
That is interesting, yeah. Other kind of discrepancies are, for example, the church mice live in St. Ninian's Church, which kind of implies that there's some form of Catholicism or Christianity in this world, but then he also just eliminates any of that in later books. And he specifically says they're not a Catholic Abbey, they're just like peace-loving creatures. And
They worship the concept of peace.
yeah. It literally says, he firmly stated that the inhabitants of Redwall Abbey practice no religion of any kind. There's also, in the first book, like, Clooney and his soldiers also mention Satan, quote, by Satan's nose, or, quote, hell's teeth,
Oh,
which
yeah.
means that they, like, believe in Satan and hell, but then he also gets rid of that in future books. Yeah, but the main thing is, like, humans are gotten rid of, and then the species become, for example, like the cat that's in the first book, if there are future cats in future books, they're not actual scale of cat to mouse ratio.
The mice get bigger, the cats get smaller. And
Yeah,
so they're
yeah.
all about the same size. They can all like trade clothes.
Yeah.
if they wanted to. I get why he did that, but I like the scale in the first Redwall book. I think it makes the world feel much bigger and much more perilous.
Yeah.
When you're a tiny little mouse and you have to fight a cat-sized cat, an owl-sized owl, a giant, like not even snake-sized snake, a giant snake.
Yeah.
When your enemies are rats who tower over you and you're only alive because you have a giant badger and like a hedgehog and like a rabbit-sized rabbit, like it makes the voles. There's a whole guerrilla force of voles. They call themselves the guerrilla like vole resistance or something. There's like 500 of them. An army of 500 is huge until you realize that they're voles and they're like half the size of a mouse. They're tiny, and it makes their plight so much more real.
Are they voles? I thought they were shrews.
Shrews. You're right. They're shrews. I keep saying voles. They're shrews. What's the difference? I don't know. But it makes their plight so much more real. Because suddenly, like, 500 shrews can't fight the giant snake.
Yeah.
So, like, of course they're terrified. Mm-hmm. In later books, like, when you have an army of 500 shrews that could reasonably fight an army of 500 cats, it kind of, like, changes the world. It changes the balance a bit.
Yeah. I think the main thing is because when Matthias is, like, facing creatures outside of Redwall, the scale definitely makes it more dangerous and raises the stakes. But then if you think about, like, Constance is this badger who lives in the Abbey with the mice, and then it gets more complicated just thinking about like...
I could see that, though. I mean, assuming it's not a ton of people where suddenly the scale really starts to become an issue, but one badger at least. I mean, it makes me think of like, I don't know, like Andre the Giant or Game of Thrones, like Hodor.
Yeah. Constance's size, even in the book itself, kind of fluctuates because it says she can go inside the Abbey and sit in the Great Hall.
Yeah.
But also she's too big to go in the Abbey, so she has to sleep outside. So, like, you know, in the animated special, they kind of show her as like twice the size of a mouse, which is manageable because then she's still big enough to be a huge threat to the rats, but also small enough to like walk around the halls and have discussion, sit in a chair, you know.
Yeah. All this to say, going back to Constance and why she's awesome.
She built a ballista.
Yeah.
She invents and builds a ballista.
And then fires it without practicing, presumably without having any experience with ranged weaponry. Okay, let's talk about the full range of Constance's activities in sequence. Constance what is her role at the Abbey?
She's Constance.
Yeah. She's like, not like the abbot's like right hand, but she's definitely like a very respected longtime member of the Abbey. She's like a protector.
But not explicitly because they're peace-loving.
She does, she does like
protector,
the big manual labor.
Yeah.
But she's also extremely intelligent.
Yeah. I don't know why I said protector, but like I think I just find that she has like a comforting vibe.
Yeah.
Like she's just there.
Like I feel like the mice, like they feel at peace when she's around.
Like
you know?
they're all mice except for Constance.
Yeah.
Who is a badger. And it's implied near the end especially that she has like a long history with the abbot. Mm-hmm. So she's there and she's cool and, you know, she pushes the cart to transport all the denizens of Mossflower to the Abbey to celebrate like the abbot's, you know.
Golden Jubilee,
his job anniversary.
I think he's been the abbot for, I don't know, like, let's say like 50 years.
Sure. Long-lived mouse.
Yeah.
It's also, I think they also say that, like, because all the mice pay tribute to the abbot because he's their doctor, essentially, and they're like, please, keep healing us, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have some berries. So this is like his way of giving back.
Yeah.
Also, he's like, thanks for feeding us. Have some big food.
And from there, we know that Constance is impressive of physical stature. When Clooney arrives and lays siege, however, we start to get more from Constance because the first foray into that before Clooney even lays siege is when he walks in with his right hand, name of Red Tooth, right? Or Red Fang.
He goes through so many right hands.
Yeah.
Clooney loses basically like a dozen officers by the end, and only half of them die to Redwall defense. The other half like backstab each other.
I'm pretty sure it's Red Tooth. So Clooney walks in, you know, a kind of like commander's meeting before the battle with his right hand Red Tooth to meet with the abbot and basically read out the terms of unconditional surrender that they demand. And this is the only time before the end of the book that Matthias actually like meets Clooney. And Matthias is very like spunky and you'll never take our Abbey. And the abbot's being very diplomatic and I will not abide this, you know, ethic of violence you've brought into our Abbey. And Redtooth, being the vicious warrior that he is, goes to lunge across the table at Matthias for being too spunky. The rats don't like spunkiness in their enemies. And Constance just slaps Redtooth into the table. Like, she just takes her paw and slams him into the table. And it's not like Redtooth doubles back like, ah. He's dazed. He's like knocked out for a solid moment.
And then she lifts the whole table as a weapon. And it's like, I'll make you a pancake.
Yeah.
She delivers like a full paragraph monologue too. She lifts the table and says, "Rats, by golly, if you don't get out of here," and delivers like 5 full sentences just holding this table above her head. And
the rats are like, oh, we gotta go.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow for the war. Gotta go.
Yeah.
The next bit we get of Constance that's very definitive, in addition to the fact that she is like leading the defense of Redwall.
Mm-hmm.
Not just physically, but like with her mind.
Yes, as a leader. Matthias has snuck out to go do Matthias things.
He's busy.
He's busy being a coming-of-age protagonist.
Yeah.
Clooney develops an idea like, well, I can't just throw rocks at these defenders and get inside, so I'll devise this plan where I climb up a tree, and I'll take this, this ferret who's really good at climbing, and we've created some kind of long plank, and we're all shuffling it up this tree. We did this whole reconnaissance thing going around, and now we've climbed up this tree that's higher than the walls, and we're steadily creeping over this branch, and I'm gonna lay out this plank to the wall, away from the defender's attention, and I'll be the first one over. I'm climbing across this plank.
And to be clear, he spends like 3 chapters on this tree plank plan.
And this is where we get the mental combined arms approach of Redwall, because as all of these defenders are doing their business and as Constance is leading the primary defense, old Methuselah, the gatekeeper, the lore master, who's just sitting in the field of the Redwall grounds inside the wall as people are getting treated for their wounds, he's just sitting there. And the abbots make some kind of side comment at him about Methuselah's being very benign, and the abbot's like, well, you don't know everything, and Methuselah's like, well, I can tell that you don't know everything either, because I'm sitting here and I'm just looking around, I'm just using passive observation, and I'm noticing the wind is blowing one way, it's blowing to the south, and as I look at this particularly large tree to the south, I notice that it's not moving like the other trees, it's swaying side to side. So they send Constance and a few people over to that side of the wall, and as Clooney has finally figured out how to get this contraption working and is clambering slowly across the plank, Constance just walks up, just appears out of nowhere, and kicks the plank out from the wall, and Clooney goes, "Ah!" and tumbles down this tree and breaks half the bones in his body and is taken out of the fight for the entire second act.
Yeah, he's taken out for, what was it, 3 weeks? Yeah.
And there's a whole separate subplot with that and the espionage that goes on in the meantime. But,
it's great espionage.
But Constance, for bare minimum effort, just a single kick, almost ends the war before the book.
Yeah, she could have just killed him.
And she almost does again.
Yeah.
She tries. Oh, she tries.
Yeah.
She tries.
This book does not shy away from the killing, the attempted killing and the killing. It's
a lot
pretty
of very
brutal.
Yeah, there's a lot of very graphic descriptions of how rats are killed.
Also, the description of the execution, or at least the attempted execution of the foxes.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There's a subplot where Clooney has to heal, and he's like, I don't want any of that Redwall banana cake pie. I was trying to avoid saying bullshit. But whatever. I don't want any of that Redwall business. Get me an old healer who's practiced in the old ways. Something where you have to give something up in order to get something back. And I was like, ooh, interesting. That doesn't really come into play. He just gets a healer who knows a bunch of basic healing methods, but also throws in a bunch of spice and pizzazz to seem more mysterious. And this is the fox, Selah. Her whole subplot has to do with her trying to sell information to Redwall about the rats and when they'll be back in business, along with her son, Chicken Hound. It does not go well for them.
No, because Clooney is, again, way smarter than any of his rats.
Yeah.
And the foxes underestimate him, and they pay dearly.
Yeah.
Both in different ways. Different horrible, horrible ways.
Selah's legitimately competent.
Yes.
The one thing is, Selah, when she goes to sell information to Redwall, the person she gets, unfortunately, is Constance. And Constance brooks nothing with no one.
Yeah.
So when she's like, I want to meet with your abbot because I have information that can save Redwall, Constance is like, yeah, sure thing. Goes behind a wall, pretends to clomp off, does the foot patter, quieting to silence, and then does the same thing back and goes, yeah, okay, the abbot will meet with you in a week. Selah comes back in a week, trailing 2 rats because the rats don't really trust her. And one of those rats is Redtooth, the one that Constance has like a bone to pick with. Sayla escapes the rats because they're these two captains arguing with each other. Again, that whole like, intra-agency rivalry. And Sayla goes to this point where she's supposed to meet the abbot. Constance comes up behind her, grabs her by the throat, and goes, "Where's that thing you promised?" And Sayla goes, "Here. No, what about my payment?" And Constance goes, "Here's your payment," and knocks her unconscious. Extremely brutal. This is like villain behavior.
Yeah.
And then here's the thing that really blows my mind. I'm like, okay, Constance got what she came for, and she brooks nothing with no one. But then she seems to know that the rats are also in the woods because she goes like a few feet away from where Sayla's unconscious body is and calls into the woods, "She's over here." And Redtooth runs over to look for Sayla, sees Sayla's unconscious body, and Constance, like a phantom, steps out of the darkness of the woods and does battle with Redtooth. And the way she kills Redtooth, the way she kills most people she gets her hands on, is she takes him by the tail, swings him around her head, and hucks him into a tree. And he just dies from blunt force trauma.
Constance.
And then she calls again into the forest. She's like, "They're over here." And I'm like, is she just trying to kill rats one by one? But no, she leaves, and then the last rat remaining walks up.
Because psychological warfare is an important part of Siege. And she knows this. She knows she can sow fear and terror by just like, the fox wakes up and goes, "Oh, that one's been crunched. We gotta tell Clooney something." And the rat's like, "I think we're gonna die. I think we're both, yeah, okay, let's go."
So that's the second thing. The last one Jino brought up, the fact that Constance invents a ballista.
And then tries to assassinate Clooney with it.
She basically has this idea like the rats are laying siege to Redwall, and then...
This was the siege tower. This was when Clooney snuck away to build a siege tower.
Right, so like he built a siege tower. Is it?
Yeah, so Clooney sneaks away, and he leaves another rat in charge.
So
Cheese Thief.
Great name.
He leaves Cheese Thief in charge.
Basically, like, there's kind of like a break. Oh, it's because they dropped a barrel of hornets on the...
Again, very Looney
battering
Tunes.
ram
Yeah,
people.
the rats try to get in with a battering ram. That was plan A that Clooney was like, this probably won't work.
Yeah.
This is the decoy.
Silent Sam, the little squirrel.
Little mute squirrel.
Yeah. He finds a hornet's nest, and then they put it into a barrel, and then they drop it on the rats, and they run off screaming. And then after they've dropped the battering ram, they also drop down 2 barrels of olive oil, so that's really slippery. Now they can't use the battering ram anymore. So Clooney's like, okay, let's like take a break. Let's recuperate. He goes in his tent, and that's where it's his like commander's tent or whatever. So he's got nice food in there. It's shaded. Constance is on the wall, and she sees him in his tent, his silhouette just walking around. She's like, I bet I could kill him in his tent.
From the wall.
From the wall. And so she comes up with like this secret plan that she doesn't tell anyone else except for...
A beaver, I think.
Like a beaver, yeah. Because the beaver helps her build a crossbow. Then she's like, okay, we only got 1 shot. Meanwhile, Clooney has snuck away to build his...
Siege tower.
His siege tower. The aforementioned infamous siege tower. And his... not quite second in command, but his hopeful second in command, Cheese Thief, decides to take up residence in Clooney's tent. And I love this scene because you immediately know he's going to die. But like it gets like dragged out a little bit. He's like so proud of himself. He's like, yes, I want it to rain so that the other rats are jealous of me because they're wet and miserable and I'm like inside Clooney's tent living the life. And then he puts on Clooney's cape and he finds the barbed spike that Clooney usually puts on his tail, and he puts it on his tail, and you're like, yeah, you're just writing your own, you're digging your own grave, man. And then he's helping himself to Clooney's food, and he's just like,
this is the life.
Yeah, he's like, this is the life. And then they don't even describe how he reacts to the giant arrow that flies out.
It's like instant death. He
Yeah.
gets like obliterated by this arrow.
I think it literally says like Cheese Thief didn't even have a second to like realize what happened to him because he just dies immediately.
The animated version of this scene is terrifying.
Oh.
Because it's played with both perspectives. Like we see Constance setting up and aiming, and then we see Cheese Thief. but it's played, the actual moment of impact is played with shadow. Like we see his shadow, because it's PBS, they can't show actual rat death on screen. You see his shadow and he's like cackling. He's like full like maniacal ecstasy. And then it's just, and he just like shatters and he's gone. And like the shadow of him like splinters. And Constance like cuts back to Constance like, got him. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, it's next level. On top of all this other stuff Constance has done, very Machiavellian, like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to kill this double agent, take her information, then kill this one rat that I have a bone to pick with my bare badger hands. And, like, on top of leading the strategic defense of Redwall, it takes, like, a whole nother level to be, like, looking across the field from the parapet and be like, I'm going to make the biggest bow you have ever seen. I have no engineering experience that we know of.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go and design what is essentially a scorpion, right? Like a ballista. It's like, it's an anti-personnel weapon for grouped up infantry, as far as I know. But she's like, I'm going to kill the leader, the enemy general from across the field. One shot, no practice. Just first draft, works like a charm.
And she would have succeeded if Clooney hadn't snuck away.
This is the point in the story where I really start to like, where I just like, because Clooney is lost so much at this point that I was starting to wonder if Matthias on his journey was just going to complete his journey, get the sword, you know, reassemble all the equipment for Martin and come back. And Clooney was just still going to be in that field. Like Clooney at that point would have had like plan A destroyed. Plan B, skipped for Plan C destroyed, Plan B subsequently destroyed. He's lost tons of troops. He's surrounded by like third-rate officers because all the good ones are dead.
Yeah.
His tent is demolished, just like turned into a makeshift awning. His armor's destroyed because Cheese Thief was wearing it when he got blasted by that arrow. He knows that the enemy has devised like some new crazy weapon that can snipe him from afar. Who knows if that's going to happen again? He's losing his mind. He's like...
Oh, he's seeing visions of like himself being murdered by a cloaked figure, which all of them wear. They all have that cloak. Yeah.
He's also getting visions when later on, when more of his officers die, he gets visions of them.
He's having he can't get a good night's sleep even because he gets nightmares of all of his dead officers.
Is it nightmares? Because one of his officers dies while he's asleep, and then he gets a vision of his officer pleading, "They crushed us, they drowned us."
No, that's straight up like a spiritual connection.
He's like being tormented by the ghosts of his officers.
Yeah.
And so I was half expecting him to just be distraught in the field, like hunched over himself, just an absolute shadow of the creature he was at the beginning of the book, and then have Matthias just like T-posing, like wearing full armor from his nightmares, like Link unto Ganon, just like out of nowhere at the end of the story, just and just annihilate him.
Ah, yes, the warrior. Constance should be the warrior.
We forgot another iconic Constance moment, which isn't entirely her idea, but the rats, they have this plan. They're digging a tunnel, and it's taken them like 4 days.
Their significant chunk of this book is the rats being like, we're digging the tunnel, and the moles being like, we can hear them digging this tunnel, guys. They're coming out. And,
and it's going to be right here.
They can like accurately predict to like the moment where they're gonna like burst out from the ground.
There's no suspense whether you think the Redwall's in danger. All the suspense is just waiting for the moles to get him.
Yeah.
Just like, get him.
Also, they've taken like most of their forces because Clooney's like having a bad day. He's losing his mind. So they're like, okay, like the boss is like not doing so hot. So I think we should all just like go and carry out the tunnel plan so that Clooney will have his spirits raised again. So they all go, they take all the rats and they're digging and they push through and they're victorious and they get one moment of glee. And then Constance is like, sup. she tips over 2 giant pots of boiling hot water into the tunnel and immediately just sends a cascade of boiling water through the tunnel and drowns/burns half of the forces.
And then she collapses the tunnel.
Yeah, and then the moles and Constance jump on a certain spot that the moles marked out as like, this is the spot where if we jump, the tunnel will collapse. And then just
unbelievably efficient destruction. Like just 100 rats probably, all in that tunnel. The front ones got burned alive, and the rest were buried instantly.
Yeah.
Brian describes it as a mass grave.
Yeah.
Like they pile
because
stones
then they pile
over it.
stones to cover up the
dirt.
The dirt, yeah. He literally writes like, and it was a fitting marker for this mass grave of rats.
Gina was talking about just the other day, whenever the mice die, right? It's described.
Whenever the mice die, it's like, and some defenders fell, and they bore their bodies away with grace. It's like, it's bare minimum, just like, and some of the defenders fell. Some of them got injured. But when a rat dies, they are crushed. Their bones shatter. The last breath gurgles out of their throat. They see red wash over their face. It's like brutal when a rat dies. When a mouse dies, it's just like a little bonk on the head and they fall.
Yeah. You can practically see like there's like no blood. They're just in peaceful slumber, carried away on a little cart to their peaceful eternal rest.
The rats have no peace. Their last second will be excruciating pain and embarrassment from their failed plan.
I keep going back and forth on this where I'm like, is this book almost like pro-war propaganda? Because the good guys are having the time of their lives. Like, when Jess the Squirrel, another wonderful character who is the best climber around, who gets the piece of fabric of Martin the Warrior back from Clooney, her and Basil the rabbit, Basil Staghair.
Another great character.
Another great character.
What?
So many great characters.
When she and her son, Silent Sam, kick over that barrel of bees onto the defenders, it's described with like a lot of like faux pomp and circumstance. They very exaggeratedly like salute each other, and then Sam the Squirrel like kicks out his leg and just swings it over to the barrel. And I'm like, they're having fun. They're having the time of their lives. Every day that ends, they go to the mess hall and just feast on wonderful food they want for nothing. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, maybe this isn't really pro-war propaganda. Maybe it's more like anti-invasion propaganda.
Don't attack the castle. This is what will happen to you.
Yeah.
Don't go conquesting. You will just have the worst time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of funny how the abbot spends so much time saying, like, we are a peaceful abbey. We heal creatures and we take care of the needy. But then 90% of the book is like battles and violence.
Oh, he knows this, though.
Yeah,
there's a chapter where he goes, if it was up to me, like, none of this would be happening.
Yeah.
But I understand that this is war.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to look away. I simply do not see.
The abbot
And you
literally
guys
is like,
plan the slaughter of our enemies.
yeah, the abbot literally, like, he gathers the council and he has a meeting and he says to everyone, all right, so I don't like violence, but I understand we have no choice because we're under attack. But I'm going to be in this corner tending to the sick and wounded. You guys planned the strategy. I'm putting this all in your hands. He just pops in occasionally to be like, ah, yes, we are peaceful mice.
And we will be again.
And we will be again.
Meanwhile, Constance is like not even paying attention. She's like, okay, so I'm going to go out into those woods and I'm going to call for a rat. And when it arrives, I'm going to murder it with my bare hands.
It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Sorry, no offense, Formal. But you know what I mean, right? The Formal is like, yes, I don't know, you're right.
Yeah.
We are peaceful, Abbey. I think there's a weapon I can design that will kill one person from across the field.
Yeah. Can we talk about the sparrows?
I love the sparrows.
Yeah.
Trading war crimes. I have stronger memories with the animated show. And the sparrow subplot, I think, is kind of toned down because it does take up a lot of the book. And it does kind of feel... I mean, at the end of the book, you understand why they did it because they needed that army. They needed the allies.
Yeah.
But at the time, you're like, this feels like a big waste of time.
Yeah.
Because it's a big quest and like you don't get the reward. You just get some information. When they shoot the sparrow down... when they're checking the weather vane, because the sword should be up there and it's not. It clearly was up there at some point, but the sparrows took it. And Jess is climbing down after checking. She's attacked by sparrows and they shoot down a sparrow and they trap it under a basket. And then Matthias like sits on the basket and he's like, my prisoner of war now. And they like put a leash around the sparrow whose name is Warbeak.
Yeah.
She's a fierce warrior, but like a young warrior. They put a leash around her and Matthias like, what's the thing where like positive reinforcement?
Yeah, basically he like rewards her every time she doesn't try to go full berserk warrior and kill someone.
Yeah, he gets a bunch of these candied chestnuts and he like puts them down and he's like, you're good, you get a treat.
Are
good.
you
You get a treat.
talking about like Pavlov's
Yes,
response?
he tries to Pavlov her.
Yeah.
And then climbs up the tower to return her. And then when she's, I guess, fighting him, because of course she's a collar around, he like dangles her off the roof Batman style. It's like, if you don't listen to me, I will kill you. I will kill you, Warbeak. Have a candy chestnut. Here's another one.
But somehow that's what makes Warbeak see Matthias as a friend. She starts calling him by his first name.
Yeah, weird optics on that
Yeah.
interaction, huh?
On one hand, it's like, oh, Warbeak now respects Matthias as a warrior. And so like she's like, oh, I'm dealing with like a real threat here. And I consider myself a threat. Now we're equals. Or is it just like fear?
Yeah.
Warbeak's like, okay, yes, Matthias. Yes, sir. Can I have more candy chestnuts, sir? And I read it, I was like, this is kind of messed up.
Yeah.
But then Matthias brings Warbeak back to her home and gets his just desserts when they put the collar on him.
Yeah.
And he's up there for like 3 weeks, just like sitting there with his collar on, like, oh.
Is it 3 weeks?
No, it's not 3 weeks. It's a considerable amount of time,
It's
though.
at
It's
least
multiple days.
Yeah, it's at least maybe not quite a week, but
And he has the thought like, oh, this sucks. Yeah, okay, collars are bad. I've decided now. Now that it's me, I won't use collars anymore.
yeah.
It's a favorable turn for the narrative
Yeah.
that one breach of conduct for prisoners of war is met with another breach of conduct for prisoners of war.
It's like Matthias is like all amped up to be a warrior and he's like, yeah, nothing can stand in my way. And the narrative's like, slow down. Hey, war sucks. This sucks.
But it's a nice subplot.
Yeah.
Getting it with the sparrows, because Warbeak, of course, we learn is heir to the throne, and the current sparrow, or as they say, it's Spara.
King Bull Spara.
King Bull Spara.
Me, Keely, you. Brian likes to write
Dialect.
dialects, which
Yeah.
some of them are impossible to read, but the sparrows are fairly legible.
Yeah. And then Matthias learns the sparrow language, which is very fun.
He seems to have a knack for it or
Yeah.
something.
It's because when he was a prisoner for them, all he could do all day was listen to them talk. So at some point he was like, I guess I'm going to try and understand what they're saying.
It's very interesting. That is a fun subplot that we get. We get a whole backstory of how the sword that the sparrows stole was lost by King Bull Sparrow to Asmodeus the snake, and Matthias has to escape. And there's a very exciting escape that he has to do where he climbs out to the very top of the Abbey roof, and King Bull Sparrow sees him and fights him off, and they go spiraling off into the sky.
And they think they're both dead.
Yeah.
And they're half right. Matthias kills King Bull Sparrow. He commits regicide. And they're like, cool, good job, kid. We're
But
glad
it's
you're not
okay,
dead.
because now Warbeak can be queen.
Yay. It's a coup. A coup for the throne.
Yes.
I mean, they literally say that King Bull Spara is not the greatest leader. And so I think some of the sparrows are like, yeah, we're better off now.
Yeah. In the animated show, I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure they truncate this section by, instead of Matthias spiraling out of control through the air and landing in a pond and nearly drowning and dying from the impact, he just grabs onto what must be a gutter, piping along the roof, and it kind of just bends, and he's like, I'm falling, but then it's the joke is that he's not very far off the ground, and then it's played for laughs, and then everything's fine.
Oh. Huh.
So
Interesting.
Definitely, when I was reading that passage, I was like, oh, I remember this. The King Bull Sparrow dies.
Yeah. Well, Warbeak's got to become queen somehow.
Yeah. So she can lead her sparrows, and at the end,
Yeah.
Matthias's grand army.
There's a bunch of shrews and
Yeah.
sparrows no one was expecting.
I'm pretty sure that Warbeak is in Matameo. I think I remembered her being Matthias's friend. So when she first showed up, I had forgotten the whole prisoner subplot. And so when I read her name, I was like, okay, she sounds really familiar. I feel like she was friends with Matthias, but they're really fighting right now. Okay. Wonder what happens there. So that was kind of fun.
Matameo, I remember reading/watching that and being kind of depressed because all of the characters, most of whom are old, in Redwall, become older
Yeah.
in Matameo to the point where Constance and Basil Stagg being a very strong, fast, agile British soldier or something, British regiment captain who's able to literally run circles around Clooney and kickbox his way to victory. He's older. He's not as effective in battle. He's slowing down. He can't keep up with Matthias or Matameo and Constance too. And I was a child witnessing the passage of time affect those I love and going, no! Not Constance, not Basil Stagg, no! Devastating.
Speaking of old characters. I also want to say that when Methuselah dies, I remembered that, and it was so devastating, and it was still devastating when I read it again.
It happened so fast.
And because it happened so fast that it is so devastating. Like, he's been such a solid presence throughout the book, and then this one fox hits him with his bag of stolen treasure, and he dies.
And it's not even like, because the fox, Chicken Hound, his mother, Selah, executed by Clooney for being a double agent.
Chicken Hound, sociopath, no remorse whatsoever.
No remorse at all. And he tricks himself, because that's the thing. When Chicken Hound and Selah are brought before Clooney, and Selah actually has maybe a shadow of a chance to slip by a clever use of rhetoric, and her son Chicken Hound immediately screws it up.
Yeah.
By giving away the fact that they were being double agents.
Mm-hmm.
And Selah pays the ultimate price for her son's incompetence. But Chicken Hound only gets a few minor wounds.
Well, he's pretty badly injured, but he manages to peel himself out and stumble his way to the Abbey. And then he's like, all right, I can ask for them to heal me. And then once I've gotten into the Abbey, I can steal all their treasure right under their noses. Haha, serves them right for trying to help me.
He's got delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
And he's actively thinking back to Selah and being like, it was her fault that we died. She should have trusted a younger, sharper fox like me. And so he steals a bunch of stuff and gets found. And as he's trying to escape, Methuselah is like, stop! And he just whacks Methuselah on the head, not even intending to kill him.
Mm-hmm. But because he's old and frail.
It's just like in the Bartimaeus sequence when he throws the firecracker and the guy slips and falls and dies, not from violence, but because he's old. Oh, no.
Oh, no. Except with Methuselah, we like Methuselah.
Yeah, we like Methuselah.
It's the fact that there's no closure. Methuselah
Matthias isn't even in the castle.
Yeah. And Methuselah being that constant presence is also we spend as much time as we spend with Matthias in that first half of the book, we're also spending with Methuselah because they're working out the puzzles together. And then he's just gone. It's okay, though. Sad. Chicken Hound gets killed and eaten by Asmodeus.
Yeah. But again, no closure. The Abbey doesn't know what happened to Chicken Hound. For all they know,
the Abbey thinks
he's still
that
running
he
around.
just got away. He got all the treasure. Methuselah's dead. They don't know where Matthias is.
It's brutal. Meanwhile, the abbot, who's been very little help throughout the whole thing, aside from, I guess, healing people or whatever, when he dies at the end, when Clooney cuts him with his poison barb, he has several pages of lying on the grass and being like, it's okay. In the twilight of my life, I see everything will be fine.
I liked his last speech.
No, it's a good speech. It's a good speech.
But you're like, what did you do, huh?
Yeah.
Abbott.
Matthias,
He's
you
the
should
father
marry
figure.
Cornflower. Cloverfield. You should marry the Cloverfield monster. Marry Cornflower and have many children or whatever. I'm like,
live in the house that Methuselah lived in.
Yeah.
That's your house now. He's dead, by the way.
You'll sleep in his bed. It won't be weird at all.
With cornflower.
So yeah, wild stuff. That's another thing. When Clooney finally gains entrance, it's just this grim, finally. There's no rejoicing. Earlier in the book, he's like, I can't wait to get in here. And this will be Clooney's castle. It's finally, I'm here. And it's going to be called Clooney's castle. And that gate's going to be called Ferret Gate. And that's going to be called Stoat Orchard.
He walks into the Great Hall and he's like, I did it. And he looks at the portrait of Martin and he's like, you see? And then he just starts wrecking the place. He's just smashing tables I did it. I did it. I did it. I need a chair.
And he's there for a good hour, lording over the denizens who are all not giving him any leeway. They're like, we'd rather die than say anything nice about you. And he's like, well, I'll show you all. And then
his army drowns under a sea of shrews.
Matthias appears, and it's legitimately epic the way the entrance is described. Matthias appears at the doorway, the very visage of everything Clooney fears. And with him, this army of gorilla stoats and legions of sparrow warriors just flock in out of nowhere. Clooney has no context for any of this.
Yeah. He's like, there's sparrows in the roof? What? No one told me this.
This random army that just appeared out of nowhere?
How many? 500?
Led by, like, the icon of my nightmare.
Yeah. No, there's literally a moment where either Warbeak or one of the shrews is like, should we, like, be more stealthy? Because I heard Clooney took over the Abbey, so he's probably going to have guards and people in the watchtowers looking out. And then someone else is like, well, no, because he's not going to expect someone else to come with an army.
But he's true. He's right. Yeah. How would you ever expect a second army to show up and conquer your recently conquered Abbey?
Yeah.
It's just wild because, like, and it's a truly epic response when Clooney goes like, "Who are you?" And Matthias just responds with this line that he had found throughout, like, the puzzles that Martin the Warrior had left, and just, "I am that is," which feels very biblical. Like,
Yeah.
I am that I am. I am that is being an anagram for Matthias.
Yeah.
Which is that whole, like, Martin is Matthias thing. And it's just like, if you were Clooney in that moment and you asked the image of your nightmares, "Who are you?" And it just responded, "I am that is." I'd be like, "Get I'm out of here."
But it's not even I am that is. It's I am that is. Clooney, you've been a scourge to this Abbey no longer. Have at thee. And then just like 1,000 like shrews. Look.
Freaking one of, like, Clooney's 2 remaining, like, captains, Fang something or whatever, tries to attack Matthias from behind, and Matthias just spins around and cuts him in half.
Yeah.
My God,
that was
cleaved
like,
in two.
I was like, oh my God.
You're just like, holy. And then he cuts Clooney's tail off. Clooney tries to get him with the barb on his tail. He gets, like, 2, like, hits on the shield off, and Matthias just goes, swipe, gone.
Yeah. How is that in the animated series?
I think he just loses his tail. I think it gets cut off.
Okay, yeah.
There's certain things you can't.
I
like,
doubt Matthias was cleaving people in two.
There's actually, it's very much a scenes of like PG violence, just like punching and kicking and whatever.
Yeah.
But like in the show, the abbot picks up a chair and starts whacking people over the head, and he looks like terrified when he's like, I can't believe it. But he is fighting in the show, which I think is very funny. But no, you can't really censor character chops off other character's tail without like losing the meaning.
Yeah.
So
It's a pretty cool moment.
Wow. Well, I feel like we could go on endlessly about Redwall. There's still characters that we didn't even get to.
Oh, yeah.
But
the squire and the captain.
Squire Julian. That made me laugh.
King Julian. He'll be king one day.
Yeah.
Be King Julian. Also, I love the lore that he's like, yes, my family had many great weapons. I'm like, your cats, what?
Yeah.
Weapons?
He was part of the Warriors.
Weapons for who?
He was a part of the Warriors.
He's from Warrior Cats. The Mossflower Forest is connected to the forest in which the Warriors live.
He's from Blood Clan, the only clan known to create objects.
The only survivor of
He's
Blood
the survivor of Blood Clan. He's like, yes, my noble lineage. And then he thinks about he thinks about Scourge. What is his name?
Clooney the Scourge is Clooney's full title, but Scourge, the leader of Blood Clan and Warrior Cats. Speaking of no survivors, there are no survivors of Clooney's horde. They are all killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when they try to escape, the cat and the owl are just out there eating them.
Yeah.
The owl is like, I swore off eating shrews and mice, but there's a lot of rats. Also, I guess Squire Julian also swore off, decided to stop being vegetarian for a moment and kill some rats.
I don't think he ate the rats, but he
probably
definitely is capable of crushing some rats.
Just killed them all.
Back.
Can you imagine, you're, in Clooney's army and you're running away, and then in the horizon, just a giant cat and owl.
Like Godzilla.
Yeah.
That's the size difference. Dinosaurs are merging over the horizon.
Yeah.
One of them's flying. You're like, no!
You've just escaped the armies of Gondor, and you meet with Godzilla and King Ghidorah, and you're like, nothing works out for us.
Yeah.
Which, in the context of the book, I guess, it's played very much as you're supposed to be okay with this, because there's whatever it's called, species essentialism, with the ferrets and the rats and the stoats. Their uniting characteristic is that they are evil.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Another discrepancy is, we talked about the foxes. Sayla and Chickenhound are described as, they're foxes, but not all foxes are bad. It's just these two happen to kind of fall into some bad, I don't know, influence, something or other is how it's described. But in later books, foxes are just totally thrown in with the rest of the vermin, and all the vermin are just like inherently evil.
I do know that like in some of the very later books, though, I think he does do a reversal.
Oh.
Because I think there are like there's like a fox protagonist in one of the books who's like a cool guy, or I don't know. I didn't read the book. But like, I think he did realize at one point that like limiting like all mice good, all fox bad, like it did get kind of stale.
Yeah.
So I think they're like mice antagonists and like rat protagonists. Like it happens.
Interesting.
But not for a while. Not while Matthias the warrior's alive. Stick to your lane, rats.
Die like the vermin you are.
Wow.
Bringing back to what Jino said earlier about liking how there is a discrepancy in sizes between various creatures in earlier books, it adds a lot implicitly to the lore and the world, because when you meet a character like Squire Julian, King Julian, and you realize that this cat, this like giant cat compared to a mouse, has like this apparent like lineage that used to be great weapon makers of old, or that, you know, this owl, this snowy owl is like a captain, has a captaincy, or that Asmodeus, the giant snake, is presumably very ancient or lives in this quarry that is like older than anyone can really remember and has all this like stuff around that signifies its ancientness. You realize that like what you're seeing in Redwall, this conflict between the mice and like the sparrows and the rats, is like a scale of civilizational conflict that is its own thing. And the more you increase or perhaps even decrease the size, because we know the bees can be communicated with as well.
Yeah, the bees have their own deal.
So like whether you go up or down like the scale of organisms, you might encounter higher or lower levels of like essentially like power wielding between these different creatures.
Like a cat civilization would like just demolish a mouse civilization, but they don't care. Yeah. Right? But then a bear civilization would just like crush a cat civilization. But again, they probably don't care. I understand why they evened out the size of the creatures. But I wish there was a world where he didn't, because I just love, I don't know if realism is the right word, but I love the scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice that we get both/all.
Yeah.
It's nice that Redwall can be, that the series can be multiple things in its various books for multiple kinds of
Because the appeal of Mouse with Sword is that Mouse is very small and his sword is smaller. That's the appeal of Mouse with Sword. It's you're cheering on literally the smallest thing that could hold a sword. And when everything evens out, it's no longer just Mouse with Sword. It's everyone with sword and they're all the same size. And it kind of loses, the stakes get muddled.
Yeah, but there's something plucky about Mouse with Sword.
I'm a Mouse with Sword. I'm a true believer of the original Mouse with Sword rhetoric.
We never got to talk about the iconic Mouse with Sword in Narnia.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
In
the
Voyage
sequel.
of the Dawn Treader.
I think he's also in Prince Caspian.
Oh well, forget me.
Yeah. His name is Reepicheep. He's great.
Again, classic Mouse with Sword.
Mouse with Sword. Can't go wrong.
Well, like they do it really great in Narnia because there's literally a scene, at least in the movie, I don't remember how it is in the book, but the Telmarines are running through the forest and then suddenly you start seeing them just like get taken down one by one by like seemingly an unseen force. And then it turns out it's like this one mouse who's like a musketeer mouse. And he's got a little like rapier and then he's just like, and everyone's like, ah!
Splinter, no, ouch.
Yeah, no, but he just like cuts them all one by one. And then I think Caspian is like, what's happening? What's out there? Because to him, it looks like these people are just like falling out of nowhere. And then it's like, just mouse. But anyways.
We all stand Mouse with Sword.
Yeah. All this to say, Mouse with Sword, good.
And nothing bad.
Nothing bad.
Yeah.
Except for those rats.
Yeah.
Rat with Sword. No,
What
no,
other-
no.
Oh, speaking of swords, the abbot names Matthias's sword, the sword that belonged to Martin.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's like Rat Biter or something?
No, it's
Rat
called
Death.
Rat, that's metal.
It's metal, but I'll be honest, if I recovered this like ancient holy sword and like someone on their deathbed was like, and your sword will be known as Rat Death, I'd be like, couldn't you call it like...
It's called like, yes, Man Chopper.
Yeah. It's like, isn't this kind of like a holy relic?
It's
I
fine.
think
The
I just
abbot
think
was
it's
on his
very
deathbed.
fun. He's like full of poison. He's like loopy. He's like Rat Death. Matthias like, I think it probably already has a name. And he's like Rat Death. Wash tower with corn flour. It rhymes.
Sorry, my last thing is that At the very last chapter is a letter written by John Churchmouse, who
Oh, what a
becomes
nice letter.
the recorder in place of Methuselah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really funny because he has like 2 personal interjections, and they're both about people's names.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is funny. Like, he says, the son of our warrior is a strong, chubby little fellow. Everyone calls him Matameo because Matthias Methuselah Mortimer is too big a mouthful. But that's what his parents wished his name to be. Like, you can feel the judgment of him being like, why did you name your kids such a mouthful of a name? And then later on he says, our abbot, Mordalphus, parentheses, no wonder he always preferred the name Alf. I mean, Mordalphus? End parentheses. Like,
Come on, John.
yeah.
Stop
Your
judging
name's-
people's names,
Your name's
John.
John Churchmouse.
You don't
I
even
just
live in
thought
a
it was
church
fun.
anymore, John Abbey Mouse.
You got retcon.
Incredible. Well, I'm glad we got to dive into this wonderful world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hooray.
Hooray!
Hooray.
Get excited for that Netflix movie when it comes out in 7 years.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Until next time, are you that is?
I don't know. I don't know if I am.
Until next time, are you that is? If you are that is, then make sure you are that is.
If you are that is, call this toll-free number. We'd really like you to come by and answer some questions. If you are that is. That is.
Wow.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Nostalgia Club. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Twitter at _Nostalgia Club and on Instagram at Nostalgia Club Podcast. Leave a comment, give us a rating, and subscribe. You could also send us an email with your suggestions for what we should review next at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com.